Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce, and James from Why Ukraine, the YouTube channel that you should all follow as well. Welcome James, long time no hangout. How are you, my good man?
Right, yeah. Dobry Dane, everybody. It's good to be back, Jonathan.
Absolutely. Just give a brief introduction for those who might not know you, newbies to the channel. Who are you? What are you up to? Where are you based at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm an American. I live in Ukraine. I've been living here since 2019, and I do everything I can to support Ukraine. I have a YouTube channel. It's Why Ukraine, as you can see, it's spelled just like that. And if you do a search for it on YouTube, you'll see that. And I raise money for drones and all kinds of supplies for the International Legion, mostly.
So we go, Why Ukraine? There you go. It's already in there. Why Ukraine? Bish bash boss.
There I am.
Go.
The Last Alliance.
That's a new. That's a nice new.
Yes. We have a Tolkien theme. I'm going with here.
I see what you've done there. I see what you have done. Excellent stuff. So go and check his stuff out over there. We are going to just do a quick run through. I mean, James probably doesn't even know what we're doing because I just literally like, do you want to come on live?
I'm used to that.
Yeah, it's how I roll. It's just Sunday. Everything's been a bit crazy now. Back in the seat, quite literally. So just thought I'd do this live. It's sometimes easier for me to do a live than a pre-record. And there's a few things to talk about. In fact, so the Iranian president is possibly dead, probably dead. I don't know if people are aware of this. Did you know about this, James?
Yeah, I've been watching the news.
Yeah.
I heard that he had been he hit like a cliff in the fog or something, and that they had a quote unquote hard landing.
Yeah,
but I hadn't heard that he was actually dead. I heard.
Well, so that's my speculation. That's hugely my speculation. So the weather is like, because the first thing I thought is like that wasn't a hard landing sort of accident. Something dubious has happened. Surely some sabotage or something. But actually, genuinely bad weather by all accounts. 3 rescuers have gone missing trying to look for them. So it is, I think, a genuine accident. Although. We may find out.
It's tough, because it's tough to say. Wow, I guess the CIA doesn't control the weather, but
yeah. And so he's a president. He's not the Ayatollah. There are people literally sending up fireworks at the moment. Fireworks being seen in several cities around Iran, which is interesting. They have tightened up security, though, in Iran. So there's elements of military vehicles heading out and about. As you can imagine, they are worried about what might happen. But this could be a significant change of direction for Iran. Just don't know. Obviously, you can't predict these things. That's why I'm making long-term predictions about what might happen in any country in the world is dependent on all things remaining equal when things don't necessarily remain equal in that way. And the weather, as you say, might well have scuppered things for Iran's situation, but who knows what will happen.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it does. It is somewhat interesting that here we are in this, edging towards global conflict, and Iran in direct conflict with Israel and also the United States, and just by chance, this sort of thing happens. I'm surprised, but not surprised.
Yeah, I mean, the last is that the helicopter has been found. But there's no statement thereafter. Then they denied that they have found it, but I think it has been found. No update of those and the condition of anyone on board yet. That's why it's complete speculation, but I'd have a fairly safe bet that it's going to be difficult to get out of a helicopter crash in a foggy cliff side. But you never know. You never know. So, yeah, that is one thing. The other thing I wanted to report before we get onto the mapping is some good news from the strikes on Sevastopol last night. So there was claims of a minesweeper being blown up or sunk. There's also a claim of a 22800 Cyclone. That's a Corvette project Tu-800 corvette called Cyclone was struck by ATACMS ballistic missiles in the port of Sevastopol. 6 servicemen of the Russian Black Sea Fleet were killed, another 11 were injured. The ship is sunk, according to Russian media. Now, what is significant about that, if all of that is true, and one must, I guess, think it is, given it's Russians that have admitted that, is that nothing's safe in Sevastopol. So if you can, we have seen, and in fact, let's go to the map. This is probably a good time to just dip into the map. We've seen some really, I think we've got a bit of a game-changing situation, James. So we have seen S-300, S-400s taken out at Jankoy, which is up here. We've seen them taken out at Belbek Air Base. I'm not sure exactly where that is. You've had strikes in a number of places over last night, from Saki to Yevpatoria to Simferopol to Sevastopol, Jankoy. What appears to be happening is a systematic degradation of the air defenses here. Now, what that means is that the Russians will have less ability to shoot down subsequent drones and missiles, going not only into Crimea, but actually through Crimea and onto Novorossiysk and Tuapse and all these other places on the coast of the Black Sea. But in terms of Crimea, which is one of the raisons d'etre for Russia to have committed themselves to this war, is to give a land bridge to Crimea, to hold on to Crimea. It's all about Crimea. If you can send willy-nilly ATACMS into the port of Sevastopol and hit any ship now that you want, this is open season. This is shooting fish in a barrel, is it not?
I think that this reflects a good change in strategy for Ukraine. First of all, they have they've had a lot of time to plan these past 6-7 months, of all these targets that they wanted to hit. It could be argued that previously Ukraine had a strategy of, we want to hold on to the missiles that we have because, we're not sure when we're going to get more. But I hope that somebody in the Ukrainian army has learned the lesson that actually more dramatic victories, more dramatic strikes on Russian targets gets them more stuff. So the public reaction, everybody loves a winner. So when the public sees, hey, they're doing something with this, and then the politicians, in fact, in my mind at least, are motivated to, let's give them more and see what they do with it now. So rather than coming from a starvation standpoint, we don't know when we're going to get more of these. Now they're coming at it, I hope, from an abundance, this term, abundance mentality.
They do have an abundance of ATACMS, and the promise that they will keep getting ATACMS. I think it's been fairly clear from the Americans that actually no problem with procuring more and more ATACMS. And ATACMS of the 300-kilometer variants are very useful indeed for hitting pretty much anywhere on the Crimean Peninsula. So let's have a look at that. That's 293. So there you go. That's most of Crimea. You might struggle a little bit over Kerch Way, but yep.
That's the only question I have, right? Is why is the Kerch Bridge still standing? I just don't understand.
Yeah, and I think that's because you need ATACMS just aren't the right missile to do that. And anyway, they haven't had. You could do that with Storm Shadows, but I think you would need a good 20 Storm Shadows to do it a proper bunch of damage. And you're thinking 20 Storm Shadows in different places, or 20 Storm Shadows all at one place. I think personally, I'm not really bothered about Kerch Bridge because they still can't use it for particularly heavy traffic. So apparently they are still using ferries for the heavier military traffic, and that's why they're building as well this other railway coming through the southern Zaporizhia and Kherson region. But to be honest, Kerch Bridge is irrelevant if you can just hammer the crap out of the rest of Crimea with drones and ATACMS. And it's just, honestly, like, you've cleared the air defenses. It is open season. I am genuinely upbeat about the next couple of weeks, really. So we have seen, this is what I was saying a lot recently, which is Ukraine need to just sit back and hammer the Russians from a distance, because it doesn't attrit their troops. And if they get enough missiles and drones, then that's really good. And then we heard sometime back, a couple of months back, that they had got on par with the Russians in terms of the manufacturing of large-scale drones, attack drones. So previously we'd heard they're making 50,000 drones a month, which is going to be all sorts of different drones. Russians claim they're making 300,000. That seems like a load of BS because they haven't been using 300,000. So where are they? I think the Russians are just talking nonsense. Ukrainians seem to be on point with what they're saying. Then they've said multiple times now that they are on par with the construction of these larger attack drones, but we hadn't seen them use them. We've seen them use them in dribs and drabs at individual oil refineries and depots around here and there. And then, like 3 nights ago, 105 used. Then last night, 100 to 120 used. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is stockpiling has taken place. Now, whether they've still got more stockpiles, I don't know, but they're making them at a decent enough quantity. And they've now degraded the Russian air defenses. And sorry, I'm banging on a lot here, James, but we are getting to the point where we can just see, I'm genuinely excited about subsequent nights of throwing multiple, and I mean a lot of drones into Russia and into occupied territories.
And it needs to happen. It needs to keep happening night after night after night. That's the thing about it is we it can't just be for a week or a day. It has to just continue to happen, and they have to continue to. So Ukraine has to be continuously supplied.
Yeah.
And the question
well, the great thing is that they're building these themselves though for the drones.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very telling that I earlier, what was it? I guess last week, at the beginning of last week, we saw the U.S. Defense Department or State Department talking about they want Ukraine to be independent in terms of its defense needs. Now that is in some ways disturbing. Okay. But they're trying to build Ukraine towards that ability. In some ways, that's disturbing, but at the same time, also inevitable. I don't know if any of you saw that article, but
well, I mean, part of their next massive $2 billion aid package is going to be about funding the Ukrainian defense industry. So they need, on the one hand, you want the US to keep supplying aid to Ukraine on an ongoing basis because they have the best ability to do so. But on the other hand, the US need to protect themselves, if you like, from the political winds. So what's going to happen in November 2024? Who knows with the election in the US? So they need the Ukrainian defense manufacturing industry to be up on its feet and being able to provide themselves with enough stuff. And I just think, if they've got enough ATACMS, there are still a number, although the Russians have moved a lot of their Black Sea fleet to Novorossiysk, you've got to understand that Novorossiysk is not a particularly big port, right? So it's a relatively small port. It's not sheltered. The Russian ships have to moor out here, right? It is not the deep sea big port that Sevastopol is. So they can't throw all of their Black Sea fleet that has been very safely moored. You look at all of these, all the different mooring opportunities for the Russian fleet here. There are still a huge number of Russian naval vessels there that should be easy pickings for ATACMS. I think that's
we just got to keep pushing them further away. Novorossiysk, and next it'll be Abkhazia. And then after it's Abkhazia, then it's somewhere else. Just keep push Caspian Sea.
Yeah, to let people know. So Abkhazia. So what's happening is the Russians are making a new port, a new sort of Sevastopol equivalent. Somewhere it's somewhere around here, possibly. They've got an annexed region of Georgia called Abkhazia. They've also got South Ossetia. And they are building themselves a big port there, I guess, as a contingency plan, just in case, Sevastopol is untenable, which essentially it is right now, and that doesn't seem to be changing. So, I'm fairly upbeat if the Ukraine can keep throwing drones at Russia at those kind of rates we've seen this week. And even half that much, like even if that can only happen once every 4 days, right? Once a week, that's still more than it has been previously.
It needs to be consistent. It needs to be consistent because Russia's going to keep on pushing and pressing. It can't just be once or twice or 3 times. It has to be a consistent attacks.
So the Russian answer here is what? So they have a choice of either do nothing, in which case everything in Crimea is just going to get hammered, or they do something. And so what's that something? So on the one hand, it's stopping Ukraine firing those missiles. Can they hunt out those crews? Can they hunt out those industrial manufacturing facilities and take them out? But the other thing that they can do, if they're not going to do nothing, is restock Crimea with air defenses and stock Novorossiysk with air defenses that seem to be completely absent unless they have been hit, but we didn't know about them because we don't really know what's been hit in Novorossiysk over the last few days. But if the air defenses were hit in Novorossiysk, then they're rendered impotent anyway. So Russia have a choice of doing nothing or restocking air defenses. But then if they take those air defenses from elsewhere, then elsewhere is weak. Where do they take them from? This is a really good dilemma for Ukraine to hoist upon Russia.
Talking about air defenses, and of course, Ukraine needs more and always needs more. But this is one place where Russia's huge size, quote unquote, advantage is not an advantage. Because they have to cover just a much wider area to protect from all of those drones, the little, dinky little repurposed airplanes that they're using as drones. Why are those getting through? Because Russia is so much of a vaster territory that it's difficult to cover that with any amount of air defense.
Yeah, and it's a great dilemma to force on the Russians. Here, general consensus says last month sources were saying Ukraine could double defense production, but there's not enough capital investment. Surprised Europe didn't step up. They have lots of money. Yeah, there are lots of money. Is there political will? Yeah, in places it's all sort of happening rather more slowly than we would like, but it is happening. The US has mentioned have $2 billion to throw at least partly at this. So the Ukrainian Commission said that they were $10 billion short of where they could produce. So they have the production capacity, and that would assume that they have the people as well to make these things. And what they just need is the money to do it. They're $10 billion short. That is where the American next bill is going to be helping out. It is possibly where other money can be thrown in as well, as well as other defense concerns from, say, Europe setting up shop in Ukraine.
Well, ultimately, you're talking about setting up shop. Money talks, and we've been hearing so much about these unilateral or bilateral, rather, security guarantees that Ukraine's been going around signing with every country in Europe, Denmark and Estonia and on and on. I do question what would happen if as part of these security guarantees, Ukraine said, okay, listen, Germany, if you will invest in our defense infrastructure, then we will give you privileged access to, I don't know, the coal fields. I don't know. Maybe that's the wrong term. Some resource in Ukraine. When we take back this territory, your companies, Rheinmetall or what have you, will have preferred access, or at a discount to. It's the same reason. Like, a big part of the reason why Russia invaded Ukraine was to take a lot of the resources, the manufacturing, and also natural resources that are in Donbass and in the Black Sea and in Kherson, the farmland and stuff. At what point is Ukraine going to cut some deals with Europe? Because we may not like it, but that money and potential access to those resources, it could be a huge motivator, especially for the EU.
Yeah, Han YOLO here. Well done, Ivan. God, it's Putin paying you for overtime. Holy shit, look at these basement dwellers. Oh, lol. Oh, don't we laugh out loud all the time at people analysing stuff on the internet. Oh, well done, Han YOLO. You silly man. Right, okay. Let's ignore those numpties.
I had a wonderful Russian troll come in my live stream this evening. It was great fun, really.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Okay. That's very kind of you. Keith Kane, on the other hand, says, love when ATP streams. So much information. Awesome source. Right, we're going to have a look at the Frontline, see what kind of sources I have. I'm, as ever, using my map to synthesize 3 different mappers. A pro-Russian mapper, Surreat Maps, with the red line. Andrew Perpetua, who's kind of like a neutral, although he's pro-Ukrainian in terms of his political and moral alignments, but mapping-wise, he's really neutral. And then Deep State Matt, that is more aligned with the Ukrainian side. So that's to remind people. We're going to go first of all up to the north to Kharkiv, and we can see again that there isn't too much change there. I think this is really significant that we are seeing no change to the left-hand salient over here, the western salient around Lipsy, Lyobake, on the way to Lipsy, and then more directly north of Kharkiv. That hasn't changed for a couple of days. I think that says an awful lot. The question is, of course, what is the objective around here? And I discussed this at length last time. I think yesterday, talking about whether the Anders Puck Nielsen would agree that the plan is potentially a bad plan.
Yeah,
they're not clearly going to take Kharkiv, so it's going to be about a buffer zone. But there could also be, and I thought the point he made then, I'm sorry to go over this from repeating myself from yesterday, but the point that Puck Nelson makes is that there's very possibly a personal psychological element to this, where you've got Lapin, the person who is coordinating this in the north, has had a lack of, he had a pretty disastrous earlier era in the war, where he was kind of taken out of his position, and this is his chance to prove himself. So rather than do anything in alignment with other areas or provide those troops to other sections, there's this decision to go to the north. Is that the best use of their troops? Could their troops have been 50,000 troops be better placed in Avdiivka or Chasiv Yar to affect an even greater change there than what will be achieved up here? Are they losing too many troops and pieces of equipment for the amount of mileage they're getting, etc., etc.? So there could be, this might not be a great idea, but it might. Who knows?
Well, okay, so think about another possible, consolation prize. We're already seeing, I believe it was today, or was it yesterday, an artillery attack on the outskirts of Kyiv that hit like a children's play area, basically. I would say that, as a consolation prize for the Russians, perhaps, if they can take Lipsy, then they might be able to move some serious artillery within range of Kharkiv, some of their long-range artillery, to be able to just... They're not going to be able to take Kharkiv, but they could make life really unpleasant for people there.
Yeah, so it's only about 20 kilometers from Lipsy to start hammering the outskirts of Kharkiv. So, yeah, that is definitely a challenge.
Right, and then that becomes economic warfare at that point, because it's the second city of Ukraine. And if they can make it unlivable, that's going to be a big hurt on Ukraine's economy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is definitely a challenge, but they haven't made any subsequent gains in that particular salient. And in this one to the east, Andrew Perpetua has some gains for the Russians inside Kharkiv. Oh no, sorry, Vovchansk. What am I talking about? But not quite up to where Surreat Maps had previously had it. So there's some grey zone arguments over what the grey zone means here, how much the Russians robustly control some of that. But interesting that Surreat Maps has not had a change there today. So no change from the pro-Russian mapper along both of these salients, again, tells you possibly an awful lot. Although there was something previously that Vovchansk, Russians finally made new advances in Vovchansk, in which troops advanced south of the hospital, reaching Haharina Street. The attacks of the Ukrainian army began at the fire station located on the opposite shore of the Vovcha River. So that's what was said last night. So that was the previous sort of gain there. Just what I forgot to cover these 2 points from a Tatarigami thread on analyzing the whole front line yesterday. But he said of the Chernihiv and the Sumy areas, which is along the border, because what we potentially have here is the main thrust of the Russians from the Belgorod Oblast in Belgorod direction towards Kharkiv, but also there are troop accumulations in the Sumy or north of the Sumy Oblast and possibly further on as well. So, what's going on here? Are we expecting attacks in other directions
Oh,
to
certainly.
complement? Yeah, is that what you think? You think it's going to happen?
Yeah, and they're going to be just as stupid, strategically in terms of like, oh yeah, let's pile in 30,000 when we should have 100,000 or 300,000, because that's what it would take. Sumy is a smaller target than Kharkiv, but Sumy is very well defended, is my understanding. I mean, Sumy was never completely taken before, and it was completely surrounded. So, there's been much ado about the lack of Ukrainian defenses, and I think somebody will probably end up being prosecuted and demoted for that in the Volchansk and in that along that front line there. But it looks like the Russians have actually hit up finally against the deeper defenses that Ukraine has, which is encouraging.
So here, the Chernihiv area, which is further to the west on the way to Belarus, over the past month, our team has monitored Russian forces near Chernihiv Oblast. While no significant invasion forces seen near Chernihiv Oblast, localized incursions across the border may extend the front line and compel Ukrainian troop redeployment. And in the Sumy area, while we can't estimate the current force numbers, they are larger than those near the Chernihiv Oblast. We also see what seems like demonstrative actions, possibly exaggerating troop presence. The threat of another border incursion into Sumy Oblast is very real. So, yeah, could well happen. But again, is that the best use of those troops? And I just somewhat doubt it. I'm not trying to be pro-Ukrainian. I'm just thinking, like, what would I do? And if, like I've said several times already, sorry to repeat myself, viewers, but if Chasiv Yar is the important keystone, I guess, to the larger sort of Donbass operational objective, but also just or not just this crescent of cities, Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk, Slovyansk, Seversk, where interestingly there are some serious like gas deposits around here. This is your area where there is some natural resources that Russians would like. Then 50,000 troops around there would really help in Chasiv Yar right now, and that would surely completely overwhelm the Ukrainian defenses there. If that is as important as they say it is, and it would unlock those other towns and cities, then again, I'm just not sure that it was worth throwing them in that northern border area. But I'm no military analyst. So.
But like I said, Kharkiv is a big juicy target, and if they can start hitting it with with regular artillery, then it's that's a big hurt on Ukraine's economy. That's an interesting comment. Ever considered that Kharkiv and Sumy is not the end goal, but to draw yes, of course, to draw resources units. Yeah.
Here's a calculation. You have 50,000 troops, right? You put 50,000 troops in Chasiv Yar. You overpower the Ukrainian at whatever ratio to 1, right? Or you put 50,000 troops up here and you draw forces away from the front line, which means that then at Chasiv Yar, you overpower them at whatever it is to 1, or in Kupiansk, whatever it is to 1. So the question is, does placing the troops and attacking from up here reduce the ratios in other places on the front line more than having that ratio if you piled in those troops in that position? And that was my point, is that they will be drawing on reserves, but they will probably try and move away from drawing on reserves from the front, or taking people from the existing place on the front line, and try and cobble together forces in reserve back wherever, forces that were maybe going to rotate people out off the front line. And I just think that, for example, Chasiv Yar, if you put those 50,000 people in Chasiv Yar, you would achieve a greater ratio than you are achieving by drawing forces away by placing them here. So that the idea is you extend the front line, you thin out the Ukrainians, but the idea of thinning out Ukrainians is to have that ratio advantage. So,
well, Anders Buck-Nielsen really put it very well, that you quoted from him that there's no like tactic in war. Sun Tzu did not say, yes, spread all of your forces out across the maximum extent that you can, and then do little tiny attacks everywhere. No, that's not a thing.
It's actually, he was talking about how doctrinally it's more usual to just over concentrate and focus on areas and completely blast through.
Sure.
And so, yeah, that's exactly what he's talking about. I'd advise people go and watch that video. So it's a good video. It's not to say that it won't have positive effect. Drawing troops away up here, and it would be a net benefit for Russia, but it's the opportunity cost of not putting those troops elsewhere that would have had a greater benefit for Russia. And that's what I'm saying. It's just not that. I don't think it's the soundest plan that they have. Anyway, coming down to the northeastern front line from Kupiansk to Svatovo to Crimea, and again, you would expect that they are trying to draw troops away from Kupiansk, but if they don't draw enough troops away from Kupiansk and Kupiansk is not overcome, then you're wondering, was it worth it? Kupiansk, no change there. There has been this starting up again around Krokmalna and Tabaivka here, where, according to Andrew Perpetua, the Russians have made some gains, but I don't think that's the last 24 hours. I think that's agreeing somewhat with what Suret Maps had previously said. So just moving into a greater agreement there. And then as we come further to the south, no changes in the Torsko-Terny area, where the Ukrainians seem to have stopped the Russians and are pushing them back somewhat in places. Reporting from Ukraine has often talked about here the Ukrainians having localized counterattacks in some of these areas. And I thought it was quite interesting. Suret Maps, a pro-Russian mapper, said yesterday the Russians have made these huge gains around here, which is in this area of Bilohorivka. It's Bilohorivka as a town is completely flattened, nothing left of any of these buildings at all. You've got this valley between the high ground on both sides. The Ukrainians have a really good defensive position here. It's going to be very hard for the Russians. And the claim is that the Russians have moved up from their defensive positions on having already crossed that ravine or that kind of valley to the east, and they're moving along this high ground, and they've just taken quite a lot of ground there. And I was like, well, no one else has talked about this. Is this just some attacks where they've got through and then been repelled, which is what usually happens, and then Suret Maps changes the mapping? And it was interesting that Andrew Perpetua has the Ukrainians making some gains into so Andrew Perpetua says, well, the Ukrainians actually control this area up to this point over the last 24 hours, which would just complete that. My conclusion is that both mappers here completely disagree about what's going on here, and one of them is wrong. Like, one of them is definitely wrong, and possibly both. But the idea is that around here, I don't think the Russians have got this success that Suret Maps is claiming, right the way down to the chalk mine over here, where they were repelled, and that's confirmed that they were repelled, and there was confirmation of the Ukrainians in trenches over here, and yet Suret Maps still has the control of the Russians all the way back over here. So anyway, that's my little rant over.
Interesting.
So that's the Seversk front line. No changes there. Then we come down to Chaziv Yar, which, as mentioned, is supposedly the main axis of attack or vector of attack for the Russians, or it's at least their biggest objective, arguably. They have had some success, according to Suret Maps, a pro-Russian mapper in Chaziv Yar, that the Russian army managed to enter in many buildings on the eastern part of the Canal micro-district. In addition, Russian forces took control over trenches adjacent to the first houses of Kalinina, where combats with the Ukrainian army have begun. So I think that one up in Kalinina I'd already had. That's up here, unless that I need to add to that. No, I think possibly that's what I had previously. So that part of the mapping was changed yesterday, and I hadn't updated this part, which is quite a large gain, and into this outskirts of Chaziv Yar on the other side of the canal that comes down here. Potentially the Russians have made some gains, but the other mappers don't have that yet. But still, that's not getting over the canal, which is when the Ukrainians have to start worrying. And I'm quite amazed that the Russians still haven't taken this canal micro district, and that Ivaniska has been difficult for them. There's a difference between the mappers here as to who thinks whether Ivaniska is completely under Russian control and whether they have control right up to the canal or not. So it's dynamic. There's heavy fighting here every day. Both sides, I think, are probably losing quite a few, but by all accounts, the Russians are, and this is claims from both Ukrainians and Russian sources, that the Russians are losing a lot around Chasiv Yar. Any thoughts on this area?
Yeah, no, I am, and going a little bit further down the line because it's related. I'm really concerned. We can talk about the Russians having terrible strategy and tactics, but Pokrovsk and Pokrovsky are two cities that are along the supply line to Chasiv Yar, and you can see if you zoom out a little bit here, you'll be able to see.
So okay, that's Pokrovsk.
Yeah. Pokrovsk, and then Pokrovsky is to the left, to the west of Pokrovsk. It's quite a bit more, but you'll see in both cases. Yeah, there we go. Down in the lower left-hand corner of your screen there, it's Pokrovsk. Yeah, Pokrovsky and Pokrovsk.
That's Prozhyana.
Oh, okay. Well, keep going. Keep going. Then it's down there somewhere. Anyway, they're in both cases. I think that Russia's really, if they can cut off that main supply road there.
Yeah.
There we go. That's what I was looking for. If they can cut off that main supply road there to any extent, then that's going to directly affect Chasiv Yar. And that's, to me, if they can bring that under some kind of fire control,
is this road here that they were hoping, one of the ideas of their very successful attack through to Ocheratina there, one of the ideas is they could interdict that supply road here, or go north to join up with Chasiv Yar, but actually they seem to have sort of not necessarily.
I'm not seeing it on the maps, but I've been seeing verbal reports from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense of attacks in both of those two areas, Pokrovsky and Pokrovsk.
So my question is, when you see things calm down or not, again, there aren't huge overloads in these areas. There's just the normal Russians have an artillery advantage, they have a numerical advantage, they have a mechanized equipment advantage, but they, in the same way they've always had that. There doesn't seem to be the strength in depth for them to continue hugely here, and up here. And so this is why I cast doubt on the sensibleness of them attacking in Kharkiv, when there are elements of thought for me that they have sort of culminated around here, or at least it is grinding. It is not easy for the Russians to take the land they're taking here, and where we're having huge successes across this this sector here. Now they aren't. Day after day, they were making really significant advances. That seems to be now much more grinding and a bit stop and start, and that's good news for the Ukrainians. There's a lot more stability there. There are still areas, it's still really difficult. Ukraine is still on their knees, but they're starting to get more equipment coming through, and I just don't know what the prognosis is for Russia going forward without some massive international national mobilization.
I don't completely believe Zelensky saying that all the units have all the artillery that they need.
No.
I'm sure that that's not entirely true, and as Greg Terry has said, but it's going to be if it's very soon. I should hope. And one thing I would like to say is, just because on the map it doesn't show things, all along the lines, every several kilometers or what have you, there's constantly back and forth artillery and mortars,
heavy fighting.
The maps really focus on advances or attempted advancements. But you got to figure that all along the line, at every point, people are at least taking pot shots at each other, but especially with the mortars and artillery. So
Yeah, absolutely. So no changes until we get down to Krasnohorivka, where Suryat Maps, a pro-Russian mapper, again saying that to the east, the Russians have had some success, and to the south, inside Krasnohorivka, taking control of the rest, or well, almost the rest of the settlement itself. Some of these roads around here that they still haven't had full control over, at least according to them, they now do. As you can see, changes to those 3 areas, but actually, I noticed that there was a bit of rejigging here. I doubt it's Ukraine doing a counterattack. It's more likely that they're like, oh, no, they definitely don't control that because X, Y, or Z. Bit of evidence. But anyway, Surat Map says during the last 7 days, Russians made minimal advances along Sovietska Street. Where the Ukrainian army continues to put up great resistance. Meanwhile, during the last hours, Russian forces managed to take Nekrasova and Pushkina streets, reducing the Ukrainian presence in the axis of Krasnohorivka and the Alexandrovskoye farm base and the livestock farm. In addition, the troops managed to take the trench system northwest of the hunting house, reaching the Kaminsky Garden. So there's lots of different sort of landmarks being mentioned there. But so they have taken some of this land, as again, according to Surat Maps, and that's quite substantial amount of land if that has been taken, but take that with a pinch of salt. And then moving out towards these agricultural installations, I would have thought that that's what they are in the southwest of Krasnohorivka, and that's really the rest of the front line as far as changes that have been made. Just a few other as a little bit by Konstantinivka. I'm not sure that I have that on my map, but some Paraskovivka. There is another source here that's saying, and we've seen this a number of times over the last few days. Donetsk Oblast, a trio of Ukrainian HIMARS-launched GLSDBs slam into Russian-held dacha in Paraskovivka. We are starting to see ground-launched small diameter bombs, JDAMs, and the French version of the JDAM being used more and more to great success, and I think that's really good news. The GLSDBs, for those who don't know, are the dumb munitions given guided glide kits fired out from multiple launch rockets, and they initially were met with some jamming and some possibly technical difficulties, so they didn't do too well. But possibly they've been tinkered with and are now in a better place. The same with the JDAMs, which are those but released from a plane that guide with precision to targets. They were jammed. The American JDAMs had some jamming issues at the beginning of the war, but possibly have been tinkered with. And then we've got the French version, the Hammers, which they don't have glided kits, but they do have the ability to glide somewhat and precision on board. They don't have the wings that the JDAMs do, but they are being used very effectively, and all of them seem to be being used at the moment in a number of places on the front line. And I think that's really good news for the Ukrainians, because they have quite a few of those, and if they can be used more effectively, then that's really good news.
So are you seeing that the GLSDBs are potentially coming back? I haven't seen articles about that. I mean, I was hoping for this. It's particularly shameful given all the other problems that Boeing is having now.
So this last week, so there are claims. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether they are GLSDBs or JDAMs.
Yeah,
but the hospital in Vovchansk was absolutely hammered. I don't know exactly where that is, but it was absolutely hammered in Vovchansk with either JDAMs or GLSDBs. No one's quite sure. They've even caught the still of it, but it could be either still with the quality of the resolution.
Yeah.
And then here at Paraskovivka, in fact, there's a geolocation of this here, which I will plug in, but that is here we go. Yeah, just there. So big old explosion. And then we've also seen, I think, probably JDAMs, but could be GLSDBs used on Dnipro River as well by the Ukrainians. So yes, they appear to be being used more frequently. They appear to be being used successfully, and they have some fairly good punch to them, which is at least a bit of a I guess a parallel to what the Russians have been using with the carb bombs, which are sizable. They are the scourge of the Ukrainians because the Russians have been using them with wild abandon.
Right. It's been really frustrating to me seeing the. I'm going to stop calling them Russians. I'm going to start calling them neo-Soviets. But to see the neo-Soviets with these guided bombs, these guided bomb kits operating successfully with relative impunity, when Western weapons with the same basic idea like JDAM and JLSTB are essentially being diverted or otherwise taken out by 40-year-old Russian electronic warfare. It was really difficult for me to think that the Western militaries would let that stand.
Well, what's quite incredible when we're talking about the S-400s in Jankoy and Belbek air bases being taken out by ATACMS. You're like, ATACMS, these are 40-year-old missiles that are at the end of their life cycle or lifespan, and they are taking out the very things that are supposed to be able to take them out of the air. The S-400s particularly, which are the kind of the best that Russia have in terms of air defense, and yet ATACMS are getting the advantage there. This is not a good look for Russia. And then you can look long term into, well, what does this say about the Russian S-400 systems and about their ability to sell their wares around the world? We've seen them drop down the arms export list. France are now number 2 position. Russia are goodness knows where they are, because they surely can't sell anything at the moment. First of all, they need all the stuff, and second of all, everyone's looking at their stuff going, that's a bit shite. We would much rather buy from the US or France or wherever. So it's not a good look. But where the Russians have had great success is definitely with the carb bombs, and that's because the Ukrainians are unable to fire at the Russian planes within Russian territory. So they're basically not just that, but also in occupied territories as well. But it's the requirement of Patriot or long-range air defense systems that can shoot into Russia if they were given permission, but also can be deployed near the front line. We've seen them have some success in the past. We've seen a number of planes being taken out over occupied territory, but then we saw a couple of launchers get taken out, and then it stopped. But apparently it didn't stop because they lost the launchers. They stopped because they ran out of the interceptor missiles, which is that 7-month period waiting for the last package. And just the last thing to say on that is that the German Patriot system was apparently the one that was used up into the Bryansk Oblast up here that took out 5 in like an hour back last
so now we know,
May.
huh? Okay.
So yeah, we know that's a German one, and apparently we know for a couple of reasons. Actually, we knew quite a long time ago because a picture came out of that Patriot system with they notch the planes on the side and the missiles and whatever they shoot down, they paint on the side. And there was a picture with someone standing next to it with those five airframes on the side of that. And apparently it was a German one, and apparently it caused a bit of an argument with the German government as well, because the German government weren't happy that was used to shoot inside Russia. So possibly that's why we've not seen it being used again. But man, it must be so frustrating to think, we've got the system, we've shot down 5, possibly even 6 within like an hour and a half, and now you're saying we can't do that again. Like, you are tying our hands.
Requirement,
Yeah. So I think something needs to be done about the carb. That to me is because that precipitated the success for the Russians in the Avdiivka area. Like the whole, it was running out of ammunition, and it was the Russians using those guided glide bombs to absolutely hammer the Ukrainians. They are big bombs. There's not a lot you can do to protect yourselves against them. Your trenches will not survive when you are absolutely wrecked by those 500-pound plus 500 kilogram plus bombs. And so that has been the biggest challenge for the Ukrainians, I think. And I don't know whether they've got
someone in our chat, I believe Mitch Ashdown made the suggestion that perhaps GLSTB are just very difficult to use, in the sense that, so it's a ground land. Now, aren't they launched from artillery?
from guided multiple launch rocket systems. So like HIMARS, for example. Yeah.
I see.
So what one of the issues was, so Boeing came back and said, right, yeah, there were some issues that, we do need to do a bit of tinkering. This is how I understand it. But they also said, but you guys weren't using them very well. So you weren't doing the shaping first. So you can't just send them off and expect, well, they didn't get through. They got jammed, right? You need to take out the electronic warfare and then use them. Like you can't. They're not like a panacea. They're not like a magic weapon. They're not going to be completely impervious to Russian countermeasures. So what you need to do is shape, do this, do that, and then use them. And so I think that there was an element of, they were a little bit susceptible to jamming, but also the Ukrainians weren't using them as well as they could have used them. So once both of those issues are sorted, maybe we've got to this point.
Yeah, well, the commentary that I saw from some, U.S. Department of Defense mucky muck was saying, basically, the Ukrainians took them, used them a few times, and not to fault them at all. When you're in the middle of a war, you use something 3 times and it doesn't work. You're like, get rid of this. Let's get something that actually works and send it back to the drawing board. And that's pretty much what the Ukrainians did. Someone in the chat was asking if I'm a Ukrainian citizen, and no, I'm an American.
Cheryl was saying you're a Ukraine. fellow Arizonian. I don't know if that's...
I did live in Arizona, yes, for about 3 years.
Rick from the Netherlands says, will the F-16s have the same limitations as the Patriot missiles? How should we attack their bombers, dropping glide bombs, if the F-16s won't be allowed to shoot? It's going to be interesting to see how the F-16s are used. I don't think the F-16s want to get into dogfights with Russian planes. And that's not that you really get into dogfights anymore, but you usually have beyond visual horizon, if you're going to shoot another plane, you generally shoot at them without ever seeing them. And then the asymmetry needs to exist where you have longer radar capabilities, so you can acquire the enemy as a target before they can acquire you, and you have missiles that can fire further than the enemy. And those are your 2 areas of getting advantage over the enemy. And actually, the F-16s won't necessarily, it depends what there are theories that they are being kitted up with better radars now than they would otherwise have had. But they won't necessarily have the range on the missiles that they're going to fire. So the Russians have some fairly long-range air-to-air decent missiles. That is why the Russians have had this existing advantage, because the older Soviet-era planes that the Ukrainians have used have got poorer radars than the Russian. Even the same planes that the Russians are using are better kitted, have better missiles and better radars. And so the Ukrainians have had a disadvantage there. And the F-16s will ameliorate that. It will improve that, but it won't necessarily mean that they have the advantage over the Russian planes. What these planes should be able to do is be able to hit ground targets, ground-based air defense, and help shape battlefield areas, and so on and so forth. But I don't know that you would be using them to try and take out Russian fighter bombers that are carrying the carb bombs, if that makes sense. I could be wrong. I'm not an expert.
I'm sure that they're going to be armed with missiles with that possibility, but how far away are those? Just for example, how are F-16s potentially going to be deployed in like Sumy or in the Kharkiv front up there? It's one thing down here in the southern front where the F-16s could launch a bomb or a missile, and it's going to land or attack whatever its target is, surface or air target, within the occupied territories of Ukraine. But if those F-16s are being used up, let's say, in Sumy Oblast or in Kharkiv Oblast, and one of those missiles, is attacking an SU something or a ground target, do they have to wait until that target crosses the border of Ukraine to fire off that missile? That's ridiculous.
It's insane, especially when the Russians are using Iranian and North Korean munitions to fire across the border, and yet we are saying, oh, you can't use our stuff to fire across the border back into Russia. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Like, they're literally, it's not escalatory because they're already doing it. It can't be an escalation if they are already doing that. So, at least logically it can't, but the Russians, are Russian.
This is a rule that's going to have to be bent until it breaks, because it's a ridiculous. It's forcing Ukraine to fight with one hand tied behind its back. It's just
100%, yeah. And it is going to be really interesting to see how the F-16s are used, and I'm quite upbeat about it because the Ukrainians are doing the shaping operations now, and it's all about taking out the S-300s and 400s. Going back to the question that Rick was sort of asking, how to deal with these airplanes, you are starting to see that now. So Jankoy and Belbek being taken out. You had Berdyansk hit much earlier with, although it's helicopter base. You are seeing air bases as well hit. There was one that was hit last night. I don't know the details of it. I don't know exactly where it was. I think it was Rostov-on-Don, Krasnodar area. There was an air base that was hit last night. These are the sorts of air bases that are going to be flying the fighter bombers that are dropping these card bombs. So rather than taking the planes out in the air, which you can do, but you need to riskily put things like the Patriot system near the front line, which comes with all sorts of risks, especially when they're so desperate for them to protect the cities. You want to be hitting the air bases, and Ukraine are showing the ability to be able to do that with each passing week, with more and more of these long range drones. But of course, ideally you want ATACMS, cluster munition ATACMS, to do that, and that only gives you 300-kilometer range, so you're not going to hit the bases. The Russians have like 100 air bases dotted around, or whatever it is, all around Russia. But what you want to be doing is pushing the Russians back further and further with the use of ATACMS from on air bases.
The further back they're pushed, the more warning you have on the radar.
Yep, and the less efficient those sorties are, the less air time they have in the objective areas, because they're flying from further away, so on and so forth. And actually, the longer they're flying, the more chance they have of going wrong, or et cetera, et cetera. So even if you can't stop them flying, you can make it more problematic for them to carry out those sorties. Just want to say some thanks to peeps here. So Kevin Force, thanks mate, for your very kind gifting of memberships, 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Legend Rick from the Netherlands. As I've already mentioned, he has great questions, and we're going to come to another statement in a second. Thank you so much for your support. Brian Ivy, as ever, really great support of the channel. Really appreciate you being here, mate. I just put a video on Discord, said Rick, and also this is to remind you there's a Discord server. Its link should be linked in the description below, about Ukrainian veterans that have had surgery in the Netherlands and or are here for recovery. Even during a recovery, these heroes are helping building drones. Amazing.
Cool.
That's really cool. Nice one. Thanks for that. I'll try and check that out. I need to get back on the Discord. Time is so
Seriously.
I'm seriously lacking in time.
By the way, Paul, I want to thank Paul. So we had a raffle to raise money for a drone, and I can't tell you exactly where that drone is operating right now, but it's somewhere close to the blue dot that's on the map, that's on your map. So Paul here actually won the raffle for that we held for that drone.
That's amazing.
So he got some amazing stuff. He got some signed autographs. So the actual drone team that we delivered the drone to autographed some of the stuff that he received. He had some postcards, Ukrainian postcards and things. And I don't know if he's gotten them yet, but I think they're on their way.
And I'm okay. Sorry, I was just speaking to my other. I have a signed flag that I'm going to raffle off, and I know King Raccoon sent that to me some time ago. He actually won it in a raffle himself, but he'd already had one. He's just willingly helping out. Wow. So he sent that to me saying, "Look, if you can raffle that off again." So I've got that ready to go for a raffle at some point when we next do a push. So anyway, thanks, Paul. Really kind of you. Gifted 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships as well, as did Julian Rossiter. So thank you very much to both of you. You guys are absolute legends. So that's broadly bringing us to the end of the Frontline update as far as I have it. That there are no changes to the southern front line goes towards this idea that the Russians don't have quite enough in the tank to be pushing in as many places as they want. Yes, there will still be fighting. Yes, it's going to be tough in Robotina, where the Russians are still trying to take that, and the Ukrainians are still trying to defend there. It's just been amazing, as far as I'm concerned, that they've held on there as long as they have. And and Dnipro River, no changes there. But it just, I get this sense, and I have to check myself because I don't want to be too positive, but I just do feel like the Russians are really struggling to make any serious gains. And it goes back to what I've said for a long time, which is, I said this during Bakhmut, and I'm one who thought that Bakhmut was a win for Ukraine, right? And I know this is highly controversial, particularly at a time when it was, oh, woe is us, we're losing Bakhmut. And you're like, Bakhmut's lost any kind of intrinsic value it had. It can't be used as a logistics hub, which it kind of was. But as soon as the Russians were within kind of this distance of Bakhmut, you couldn't use that as a logistics hub. So what you needed to do was make the Russians pay as much as possible for taking Bakhmut, and they did. The Russians lost phenomenal amounts of troops, not that much equipment because it was mainly a meat assault, and Wagner succeeded there, but it cost them hugely. In fact, it was the death of Wagner, quite literally the death of Wagner, because from that he took his troops away from there to lick their wounds, and then mounted that ill-fated mutiny, and he ended up dying. Now, that wouldn't have happened had Bakhmut not been so costly, I don't think, for Wagner and for the Russians. And so I honestly think Bakhmut was history will look at that as being rather successful for the Ukrainians, to the point of fact that it took them the best part of a year to take this amount of land, right? So it was something like that, really. So you got probably not that, because I've gone past the 2014 lines there. But if you're talking about really what they did in that Bakhmut attack, it was maybe 25 kilometers worth of land or something like that. And then you think, well, you use that many troops, like some say 35,000 Wagner troops were lost doing that. And then other conventional troops, and et cetera, and then DPR, LNR, all that kind of stuff. So you're thinking, right, Bakhmut is that tiny blip on the map, and hang on, don't the Russians want to get to Transnistria? Like, that is 325 kilometers. I was talking about 25 kilometers cost the Russians that much. That's 325 kilometers, and Transnistria is your minimum. Right, that like really, yes, Donbass. Okay, so you got Donbass, and you got getting to Transnistria. That's to say nothing about taking Kyiv, nothing about taking Kharkiv. That's nothing about taking the whole. If you're still maximalist about taking the whole of Ukraine. So when I say I'm not sure the Russians have got enough left in the tank, they've maybe got stuff in the tank to take up to, I don't know, Pokrovsk, maybe on a really good day, if the wind's going in the right direction and you're squinting. But realistically, I don't know what the Russians can really properly achieve. And I know the Ukrainians are finding it difficult and they're on their knees, but going forward, Russia would have to mobilize a massive bunch of troops to do more. Sorry, I'm going on. What do you think?
Well, I was really thinking about this exact topic, and like, what is Russia's strategy here? And I just finished a live stream on my channel, and part of it was dedicated to the possibility that maybe Russia's real goal here is just to drive global warming. because if we can hit 4.1 degrees Celsius in the next 50 years, then pretty much Siberia and Canada are going to be the only livable places on Earth. So,
well, it's really interesting you mentioned this. right? And I'm not here to have a debate on climate change. It's happening. Get over it. Or not get over it. Get over denial that it's happening. Okay. But what's interesting is climate change is to the benefit of Russia. So what's happening in Russia is that the permafrost is melting. And this then arguably makes Russia more agriculturally viable. So where Ukraine is a breadbasket of the world, Russia is to some extent as well. And actually, if they pump out more hydrocarbons, so they can make money on pumping out hydrocarbons, whilst also warming the climate so that the permafrost and the tundra melts, and you start getting agriculture in these vast swathes of land that are otherwise unusable. And that's in you. So you could
maybe that's Putler's 4D chess here. I don't know.
Yeah, yes, but yeah. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. So just a few more thanks to be made. Here we have Blonde Bombsheller saying, "Great to see why Ukraine here, JP. You're so awesome. Thank you." Well, no, thank you, Blonde Bombsheller.
Yeah, thank you, Blonde.
And also John Larkin, who's a great supporter of the channel. Not for Ukraine, get a couple of 99 ice creams for the twins. So this is for those American and foreign viewers in the UK. If you get a cone with an ice cream on top and you stick a chocolate flake in it, that's called a 99 flake ice cream. So anyway, thank you very much, John. I will oblige. My boys will be particularly happy about that. AJ Simon says, "And from a beer from me," and that makes me. I saw a great meme the other day, which is this dad holding his little child's hand, and the little child says, "Oh, mummy gave you enough money for haven't we got enough money for ice cream for both of us?" He said, and the dad says to her, "No, sorry, mummy only gave me enough money for 3 beers." Like, nice one, Dad. That's a proper dad. So anyway, I digress. At some point, Ukraine will have to start reclaiming its territory. How long before we start seeing this happening? Great question, $1 million question. That.
Yeah.
So my view is that they can't realistically do anything until 2025, and certain things have to be in place. But before you get to 2025, they will have to take the initiative off the Russians, at least in some places, because otherwise they allow Russia to dictate everything that happens on the front line or everything that happens in the war. So you can't just sit back and soak it up while you reconstitute, get your equipment, get your troops trained. There will have to be localized attacks that will wrest the initiative off the Russians so that they are having to react and put resources to where they didn't want to put resources. But you're not going to see a major counteroffensive until 2025 because they just won't be able to.
Ukraine has to get enough weapons, first of all, to build up a force. Then they have to recruit that force. Then they have to train that force. That's, in the best scenario, that's 6 months away.
Yeah. Not until, I wouldn't say, spring 2025. And what you will see, though, Roy, is that what Ukraine is doing right now. So we have seen in 1 week an incredible output of the Ukrainians. Like, literally, if you think what's happened in Novorossiysk, Tuapse, and right across Crimea in this last week, with some 200 odd drones being sent and a bunch of ATACMS, now multiply that by, I don't know, 26 weeks for half the year. So 6 months of Ukraine doing that. Imagine the damage they can do to Russia. And if Russia can't replace and not just replace, but improve their air defenses. So their air defenses are not working enough at the moment. So in order to stop Ukraine doing what they're doing now, they have to improve their air defenses, but it's going to go the other way. The Russian air defenses are going to be degraded consistently. So not only will they not be able to improve it, it's going to get worse, which means that what you've seen in the last week from Ukraine possibly will get even better. It will be a snowball. So as the Russian air defenses get degraded, the Ukrainians will have better ability to strike at the targets they want to, and that will keep happening until if that happens for 6 months, Ukraine will be in a far, far better position, and they'll be able to hopefully use some of those attack drones to hit not just distance, right out here and refineries, but actually start using them like Lancets. It will get a Lancet equivalent, because at the moment Russia has an advantage in this kind of range. So they use their Lancets to hit behind enemy lines and take out Ukrainian equipment in that medium range. That I think Ukraine really needs an answer for. So they need their own Lancet to do that. But I'd like to see during the next 6 months, Ukraine do what they've done in the last week, but also take out all sorts of targets within the 100-kilometer range.
The danger is that, like, for example, the American public might hear, "Oh, Ukraine got the funding that it needed, the $60 billion. Oh, great! Well, then they must have won the war," and then they just sort of tune out because the election's happening or whatever. And this is where our viewers need to go out and make sure that people who don't watch YouTube, Why Ukraine or ATP Geopolitics, know that Ukraine, the fight still continues. Russia is still every day attacking. And just because there's no red dot or a red arrow on the map doesn't mean that people are not dying in that place.
Yeah, 100%. Always worth reminding ourselves about that. Just lots of stuff going on in the comments, which is
F-35s.
Sorry, just to go on the Tundra.
Oh,
yeah, I was aware that it's not like suddenly it's like, agricultural land, perfect tilled agricultural land. I get that. Sorry, what were you going to say about F-35s?
Oh no, there's one person in the chat keeps asking about, can they send F-35 to Ukraine? No. I mean, theoretically they could.
Yeah, because then anything.
But will
they're never going to.
Absolutely no. Not until and unless NATO itself has troops on the ground in Ukraine. And I mean real troops, not just trainers. I don't think there's any circumstance, unfortunately.
I think so. F-35 is a proper 5th generation aircraft, which would be sort of very useful, of course. But yeah, it's never going to go there. Gripens would be nice. I think that would be
they are on the list. I mean, as I understand that there's plans for that.
And their theories, I'm 50-50, as I think they might be being trained on them and we just don't know about it. We know they've had initial training on Gripens to see if they are compatible with using them. We know that Saab will definitely want, so the manufacturer will definitely want them to be used in Ukraine because it's a business decision and it's advertising and it's arguably a better choice of plane than the F-16. So it could have great success, but the only issue is that there aren't enough of them. They are advantageous for what they can fire, things like the Meteor and other munitions that they can use,
and in terms of runways and general ruggedness,
so they can operate on shorter runways that have like foreign object debris. The way they suck up air is different to the F-16s. The F-16s will suck bits of crap on the runway up into their engines, and that's a real problem. So you can't just F-16s can't take off from anywhere, where Gripens have been designed to be able to take off from like Swedish roads. So they have a really small maintenance team, and they're also cheaper per air mile, like considerably cheaper. There are loads of advantages to using the Gripen. The disadvantage is there just aren't enough of them, and that's a bit of a deal breaker. But Saab would like to change that. They'd like everyone to buy Gripens, right? So if there's a political and military will, then there should certainly be a way, and these would be really advantageous, I think. Tom Williamson, my fellow skeptic, legend that he is, speaking of conspiracy theories, but he and I are both not fans of conspiracy theories. What do you think of the idea that Putin is dead? However, sometimes there are theories that I think do have some good basis. There was a theory that Putin died last October, and that there are several Putins, and that one of his, like, the idea is that the original Putin might not still be alive, but does it really matter? Because is Putin actually just being manipulated by the FSB? I think this is conspiracy theories aside. How much of Putin and his administration or his tenure as president or prime minister has been strings being pulled by the FSB, or is he independent of the FSB? Do you know what I mean? I think this is a really interesting question, because if Putin was to be, I don't know, assassinated or got rid of or whatever, is it actually the FSB that's really running things, and would some other person be put in charge, but they'll be able to carry on seamlessly because actually Putin was just doing what the FSB was dictating anyway? I don't know.
This pulls to the premise that this whole war is Putin's war, and he's the only one who started it and wanted it and has anything to do with it. And I think that we have seen pretty conclusively that that's not the case. There's a whole section of the Russian government that was pushing for this, including parts of the SFB. And I think it's most telling, the whole deal going down with Shoigu and his cronies, who basically we found out now, it's very possible that the real reason this war was started, aside from global warming, the real reason this war was started was Shoigu wanting to cover up or at least distract Putin or certain arms of the Russian government from his massive corruption. And so there was an investigation into the Defense Department's corruption under Shoigu and his underlings in 2021, and lo and behold, let's start a war. And now finally that cat's been let out of the bag, and it's come back around.
I don't know. I'm of the opinion that everyone in Russia is involved in corruption, and it's just basically administrative knowledge that that's the case, and that allows them then to have compromat on everyone should they need it. So literally, there is no honest broker. There's no honest entity in governance in Russia. So that if the FSB go, right, we need to change that person's had his time, is not useful for us, then just dig out the file. Everyone's corrupt, so we've got something on everyone. I mean, there's the idea that Borisov, the new defense minister, he's a straight down the line kind of guy. That may be the case. He may just be a rarity, but I'm fairly sure that they allow corruption to take place because it can in the end be useful for them. So even like Timur Ivanov, the number 2 under Shoigu, right, became apparently the second richest person in Russia. Now, he has to be allowed to become the second richest person in Russia. Like, the FSB don't just sit, but like you can only become the second richest man in Russia by holding a state position, right, on the state wages, if the FSB allow you to do so. There's no way. So that when he was then hoisted out of position the other week and arrested for corruption, like that they didn't know that before is just impossible as far as I'm concerned. So absolutely. His mansion was just phenomenal, right? And that's common knowledge. It's not like that's a secret where he lives. The FSB will know where he lives, right? And so therefore my opinion is that everyone's got compromat on them. It's just when your time is done, your time is done. Or as Vigo says, corruption is the grease that keeps the engine running. Absolutely.
Don't we want the whole world to just run like that? Wouldn't that be just great? Gosh, Iran and China and Putler, well, they just seem to have the right idea for economic development, don't they?
Well, like I was saying the other day that, top 1% in Russia have all the money. And someone was saying, isn't that the case pretty much everywhere? And there is this element that under any kind of system, even capitalist systems that are functioning fairly well, like the UK, like the US, there is going to be that imbalance. What we'd hopefully want is something like, in my opinion, would be the social democracies of the Nordic nations. But then you've got different contexts of like natural resources that help out there. But the difference between the rich and the poor is the best in the world. And they also have the highest ratings for happiness, for welfare, for longevity, all these kind of metrics of success. They seem to have it all. But to some extent, the difference between the rich and the poor and this concentration of the rich is going to be existent everywhere to a degree. It's when it becomes completely unacceptable. So some will say that's not acceptable in the US, and we can have that argument. But the situation in Russia, where you've got people in in Yakutia and in Buryatia. So you've got some of these regions over to further to the east where that are really I forget exactly where these are, but over in some of
Yakutia is
these,
way east.
yeah.
It's the largest state, I believe.
Yeah, so you've got some of these states that are massively rich in natural resources. Yeah, here it is. Is that Yakutsk? So
Yakutsk.
there's probably Yakutia
Yakutsk.
there. So that's got like 82% of Russia's diamond resources are in this region,
Yeah.
and therefore it should be. It should be doing very well, thank you very much. But because that money is concentrated in a few at the top, or really in a few that aren't even in the Yakutia, probably that over in St. Petersburg and Moscow,
Yep.
there is no redistribution of wealth in Russia that's effective. It's a kleptocracy. So Putin and his cronies are stealing off the state, stealing off the people, and those people do not get the fruits of their local area reinvested into them. And so the problem is these people living in some of these regions say, we live in abject poverty here. The only way out of this is the only way to get social mobility is to join the armed forces and to go and fight in Ukraine. So you end up getting a rather large proportion of people fighting for Russia are from these ethnic minority areas. And it's not that that Russia is prima facie racist and recruiting from these areas because they don't care about those people as much because they're racist against ethnic Yakuts or ethnic Buryats or whatever. But it's more an endemic racism or an endemic privileged society for those who've got it in the West, such as Moscow, Muscovites, and St. Petersburg, and there's lack of care for these other. It's a huge nation, Russia, and so many of these regions just don't do well. And because they are given less love from the Kremlin, they are neglected and they are desperate for social mobility. There's poverty there, and so they join the army. And that's why you've got this propensity to have, an army that has a greater influx of people from these poorer regions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's my tuppence.
One of your viewers, Kevin Force, said this channel should have a serious discussion about what happens if Russia falls into chaos and civil war. When?
So this is one of the arguments that many in the West use for not having Russia lose the war, particularly lose it big time and quickly. Because if it lost such that it kind of all fell apart, the Russian Federation fell apart, there are lots of people saying that this is not good for global security, and there are people argue that there'll be nuclear warheads or enriched uranium or whatever, or other elements of a catastrophic deconstruction of Russia, of the Russian Federation, that would be really counterproductive. And actually it's better that Russia doesn't fall apart, and therefore we shouldn't be helping Ukraine to the extent that they completely destroy Russia. That is one theory. I don't adhere to that. I think Russia probably needs to deconstruct and then reset itself.
Mm-hmm.
I think it needs a Control-Alt-Delete, and I think Ukraine's probably the best way to expedite that.
I just hope that our governments are preparing for that inevitability. I hope that they've got multiple SEAL Team 6s ready to fly into Russia at any moment and lock down as much of the nuclear material as possible. I hope that our countries have, CIA and MI6 on the ground right now in Russia, laying the groundwork for these things rather than taking a handoff approach. The chicken Kyiv mentality is just no longer holds any water.
Well, I wonder. I'd love to know what goes on in the Biden administration as far as people like Jake Sullivan, what their rationale is, whether they're. I was reading in a book, Overreach, by Owen Matthews. I've just finished that today, where he talks about how China have actually had these communications with the US in terms of we don't want that to happen because we don't want this nuclear escalation. And actually, they are putting pressure on the US not to. So it was apparently earlier on when I think the US were having pressure put on them to give F-16s, and they were going to do it, and indeed they got some MiG-29s from Poland and Slovakia, and China were putting pressure on Russia, on the US at that point, and US took a step back, and that was very de-escalation kind of, and everyone sort of blames Jake Sullivan, etc. But there might be this rationale that actually China had a lot to do with that, and there are things that go on behind closed doors that we just aren't aware about, and that makes sense of the data, because otherwise you've got people just, in my opinion, making abjectly stupid decisions. And I find it hard that people sit there and go, well, here's all the data, I'm going to make a really stupid decision. Like, if stupid decisions are made, it's because there are things we don't know, or there's rationale, there are weightings of evidence and rationale that we don't understand, because there are other things, there are other variables going on that we just don't know about. Anyway. There you go. Anyway, that's probably enough from me. I do need to go and see my family and whatnot, but hopefully this was a useful Frontline update. We've now started talking more generally. Is there anything else you think that we need to discuss before we move on?
I'm always beating the dead horse about two things, as you know, I've said it on your show before. I'm waiting for two things to happen. I'm waiting for Ukraine to launch an assault across the former Lake Kakhovka. And Vigo, I appreciate this little, that's good. Coup insurrection. I mean, Russia's fallen apart before, and it will again. But yeah, I just think I call it hopium or whatever, but I'm waiting to see an attack across the former Lake Kakhovka, in the areas that are fairly undefended. There's that, and I'm waiting for Ukraine.
What do you mean across here?
Yep. Because that's no longer there. It's just the river, and once the ground's no longer mud. I've seen pictures. Some of my viewers sent me pictures of what that lake bottom looks like now, and it's basically a park, a forest, a bunch of weeds.
Interesting.
Yeah.
This is a great question. Hey JP, apologies if it's been covered already, but I can't. This is Richard RJK Spinningwood, but I can't help wondering if Russia considers Crimea, etc., to be Russian. Where's the escalation if Ukraine uses US weapons in Russia proper? This is actually a really good point, isn't it? Which is like, US says, for example, it could be any country, it could be Germany, it could be whatever, saying, hey, hang on, we're not happy with you using weapons inside our weapons inside Russia, and then Russia saying, yeah, you can't do that, otherwise that's going to be super escalatory. And then on the other hand, Russia saying, oh, by the way, this is Russia. Like, Crimea is Russia.
What I say?
Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk is Russia. It was like, okay, well, if that's Russia, then Belgrad's Russia, and we're going to fire some missiles into Belgrade. Stick that up in your pipe and smoke it.
Exactly. I mean, if the Russians had their way, they'd say all of Ukraine is Russia, and a lot of them do. So, come on, just quit going around that circle. We've been doing it for too long.
Yeah. Thanks all to all of you in the live chat. Cheryl, always very kind. Your output is amazing. ATP, the most comprehensive daily coverage of all things Ukraine related. Thank you very much for that. I attempt to be a one-stop shop. It does mean I'm entirely obsessed, and there's not much else to my life than sitting talking to you guys. But at least we can be sad together and concern ourselves. Well, it's not sad. I think it's insanely important, which is kind of where my obsession comes from. Really, I think it's morally and politically the center of the world, the epicenter of what's going on, I think, in the world at the moment. So, well, look, go and check out James's YouTube channel if you have not already. Subscribe to him, please do. He's literally at Y, but actually WHY Ukraine.
Yep.
So if you
Jonathan, will you hit refresh on that page? I see that looks like there's a little error that I want to make sure the change is coming through. Yes. Okay. My fundraising page has changed. It's now Buy Me a Coffee. So if you go there to the Buy Me a Coffee, we are doing a fundraiser for a drone, and we're going to send that drone straight out to where you saw that blue dot on the map.
Yep. So Bilahorivka area. That would be fantastic. Go and help out James. Check out his channel. But thank you so much, guys, for being part of this team. I really appreciate you. We almost had 500 people watching this at some point, so that's a lot of people's interesting Sunday afternoon. And evening and morning, and depends where you are. Anyway, for the time being, take care, y'all, and I will speak to you, no doubt, an awful lot tomorrow. In the meantime, go and check out James's stuff. James, final words?
Yeah, one mention here. One Grail just said, anyone have opinions about reaching out to channels like Todd from Todd's Workshop? It's another YouTube channel, Weapons and Tech History, to see if they want to help NAFO. That's a great idea. And that is something that is on my list of things to do. I've actually already spoken to Todd from Todd's Workshop about ways to help Ukraine. And that is something I have that's in the works. Just non-Ukraine channels that support Ukraine. They're just not about Ukraine. Those are the people that I want to get helping Ukraine.
Interesting. And I just want to give a little shout out to, not that he needs it, but Jake Bro reached $1 million for his birthday. He was only supposed to raise 40,000. He raised over $1 million. Obviously amazing. Well done to him. I mean, that's incredible. We did an amazing job with 260,000 plus for the medevac vehicles, with all the different people who were involved in that. So, we're all of us just doing really fantastic jobs. James, with everything he does as well, absolutely fabulous. So thanks to everyone. Take care, you all. James, stay online. Till the pips, and I'll speak to you soon.